Imagine the sound of sirens piercing the silence of the Middle East, followed by the thunderous drone of B-2 bombers tearing through the skies, crisscrossing the globe to launch a surprise strike on the heart of Iran's nuclear facilities. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's reality. It's fact. It's alarming. Middle East in flames. Trump's new threat could change everything isn't just a provocative title, it's a portrait of a geopolitical storm that could reshape the global future. It all began with Donald Trump's audacious decision, now back in power, to resume direct attacks on Iran if Tehran insists on advancing its uranium enrichment. This incendiary rhetoric goes far beyond mere political bravado. In June 2025, B-2 stealth bombers departed Missouri, flying stealthily to target Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan, with bunker-buster munitions designed to penetrate dozens of meters of reinforced concrete. And now, Trump threatens, we will strike again if necessary. But why act now, and why? Should the whole world pay attention? Simple. A nuclear Iran alters the balance of power in the East. Israel, surrounded by enemies, faces direct threats. Saudi Arabia and Egypt may feel compelled to pursue their own nuclear weapon. All of this lights the fuse of the so-called Middle East nuclear arms race, changing the game forever. The Pentagon is on high alert. American satellites, reconnaissance aircraft, and drones have appeared on Iran's borders. Information is leaking through intelligence. Circles, logistical movements, ammunition and equipment are being mobilized in silence. The risk of a multi-site attack, a massive synchronized strike, is real. The mainstream media only reports the superficial aspects, but it's time to look behind the headlines and understand the connections. This is strategic warfare, and this involves Israel, the centerpiece of the game. Why did they attack Iran's nuclear facilities of all places? Because, according to Trump, a nuclear Iran is an existential threat to Israel. This resonates with official voices in Tehran who have repeatedly stressed that Israel must be wiped off the map. This incendiary speak would justify any preemptive action. However, the response didn't come solely from the U.S. Iran retaliated by sending ballistic missiles against U.S. bases and Israeli cities. Tehran admitted serious damage to the affected facilities, but promised to rebuild and continue enrichment, defying Trump's maximum pressure doctrine. He didn't back down. This destruction was total, he stated, accusing the global press of downplaying the effects. The verbal escalation came with warnings. There will be no new deal if it's not on our terms. This energy dynamic brings the world closer to a dangerous crossroads. Are we approaching a true global conflict? If Iran's nuclear threat becomes a reality, Trump finds it more advantageous to strike now and deal with a conventional Iran. The calculation is devastating. War now, or a much worse. Confrontation later. Furthermore, it is important to consider the spiritual and prophetic implications of this crisis. Ancient prophets spoke of the strengthening of hostile nations and the formation of unlikely alliances against Israel. With Iran, Hezbollah, Iraqi militias, and groups in Yemen positioning themselves, some see before our eyes the foreshadowing of events described in Ezekiel 38:39, Daniel 11, and Matthew 24. In the prophetic script, the war of Gog and Magog begins with coordinated attacks, with the siege of Jerusalem imminent. This is not an end times theory, it is a warning. This scenario also places the United States at a decisive point. Will it have the capacity and courage to intervene when necessary, or will it back down under international pressure? The choices made by the Pentagon, Congress, and world leaders could seal the fate of millions, not only in the Middle East, but across the globe. Now imagine an even more electrifying scenario, where every piece on the geopolitical board is completely silent, yet heating up beneath the surface, ready to explode. Imagine the diplomatic wings in Washington working quietly, seeking support for an action that cannot be revealed. Think of secret feats. F-35 fighter jets conducting night flights along the Iranian border, silent American warships accompanying fleets in the Red Sea, strategic submarines deploying Tomahawk missiles beneath the Mediterranean ice. All of this appears not in the headlines, but in the hidden pages of secret newsletters. And then there are those infiltrated in the enemy camp, CIA and Mossad agents operating in Tehran and Qom, monitoring nuclear facilities, recording hidden videos of underground centrifuge factories, intercepting communications from Al-Quds and the Revolutionary Guard. These reports don't leak by chance. They're read in rooms with black curtains and screens filled with red numbers. Stored fission capacity, centrifuge rotation, enrichment intensity. And each alert that arrives alters the readiness status of a fleet, triggers a package of sanctions, or forces a president to decide whether this is the right time to act. With Iran accelerating enrichment to levels between 60% and 90%, American satellites are recording suspicious changes in the inspection regime, the deployment of Russian technicians, increased frequency of stealth flights, and discreet transfers of bunker-busting equipment. The scale of the rebuilt infrastructure suggests that some of it has been moved to mountainous areas to the north, far from easy access by intelligence agencies. They are digging new underground, creating new layers of protection that make targets more difficult to destroy. On the Israeli side, cyber warfare experts are preparing what would be a digital disruption, attack plans to disable power, halt rail traffic, and freeze communication networks before any bombs arrive. The digital war began even before the physical war. It's a silent attack that could precede explosions and sirens. Israeli command centers are already training to evade malicious attacks, knowing that Iran has hired Chinese companies to bypass firewalls and infiltrate code into smart infrastructure. Meanwhile, Saudi and Egyptian diplomats hold discreet talks in Abu Dhabi and Cairo, whispering about a containment operation, a euphemism for a possible military intervention or diplomatic blockade. The internal pressures in these countries are enormous, populations divided between modernization and conservative clergy, and any public move against Iran could spark mass protests. Therefore, the negotiations remain silent, full of hidden layers that only those on the inside understand. And then there are the unconventional powers. Turkey may decide to support the siege by deploying HIMAR batteries in Syria. India, concerned about the nuclear balance in Pakistan, is watching cautiously. Japan, a traditional Western ally, is pushing for additional sanctions to curb the power plays. And within the U.S., the debate in Congress has become muted, almost hidden, with voices already considering the use of troops on Syrian or Iraqi soil to secure launch points for surveillance drones or weapons depots. In Tehran, the Ayatollah's alleged silence conceals closed meetings. The priority is to rebuild the entire enrichment chain by 2027, in parallel with the resumption of Persian influence in Iraq and Syria. Long-range weapons are being sent to Shiite allies, consolidating a zone of direct influence. If an American attack occurs, the response will come not only against Israel, but also against American bases in Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia. A retaliation plan that could involve ships, ballistic missiles, and simultaneous cyber warfare. Behind all this lies the fiscal component. U.S. technology companies are already preparing bids for defense systems in Israel, trillion-dollar contracts that would span decades. This means that even economically, war is all but guaranteed. All it takes is to light a fuse. But there's more. Religious leaders on Jerusalem's Temple Mount report a growing spiritual movement, as if something divine needs to be answered. Smaller temples in the Jewish temple teachings are springing up, with discreet permissions for archaeological studies disguised as historical research. All of this raises the inevitable question: if the West were to attack, would the rebuilding of the Third Temple be accelerated? Would this act have global spiritual ramifications beyond geopolitics. Are we about to reconfigure something that has long been prophesied? In this feverish state, every explosion, every map, every movement connects to something much bigger than the video replica. It's about dismantling narratives, revealing to you what the great halls of power try to hide. How much of this puzzle have you already grasped? Comment "Shadow War" if you also feel we're living through a war of shadows or prophetic storm.